Stay tuned to meet a woman who was born in the 20th century but raised in the 19th century. My name is Yvonne Lewis, and you're watching Urban Report. Hello, and welcome to Urban Report. My guest today is Dr. Rachel Williams-Smith, chairwoman of the Department of Communications at Andrews University and author of Born Yesterday. In addition to being a very accomplished woman, Ms. or Dr. Williams-Smith has a very interesting story to share. Welcome to Urban Report, Dr. Williams-Smith.
Thank you for having me.
May I call you Rachel?
Please.
Okay, good.
That's who I am.
Okay, good, good, good. Rachel, your story is so compelling. I have heard bits and pieces, and I know a little bit about it, but I want, and our viewers love a good story, so I want you to share with us your background, because your background is really, really interesting.
So the question most people would ask me then in relation to my background is, why does your book title say you were born in the 20th century but raised in the 19th? So
let's start there.
That would be a good starting place.
That's
right?
a good starting place.
So my background is that up until the age of 5, my life was fairly normal. But at around 5 years old, my parents, when I was about 5 years old, my parents had been doing a lot of reading, and they began to make changes in our lifestyle. So it was a process that happened over just a few years. It started with our diet, and then it moved to dress. My mom told me that that she had been reading about how women should wear their dresses down to the foot, and how Jesus wore a robe down to the foot. So that was the first thing.
And then, this is an Adventist home.
This is an Adventist home. So she was telling me she had read in the writings of Ellen G. White, 2 to 3 inches from the floor, and Jesus wears a garment in Revelation chapter 1 down to the foot. So I wanted to be like Jesus, so I started wearing the dress, the long dress. And then it was the diet. And I still remember my mother said she was going to fix us one last really good meal, and then we were going to go all healthy. And we did. I didn't like it.
Wow. It's interesting because it was not a gradual shift. It was just an immediate shift.
It was a gradual but intense. It was not gradual. It was in a series of things.
So kind of incremental.
Yes, but all happening very rapidly and one on top of the other. So first the dress, the diet, and then the next thing was my parents began to feel like they needed to separate us from the worldly influences. And at this time we were living in Huntsville, Alabama, near Oakwood College it was at the time, and my brothers were attending the Annanite Elementary School.
Yay! And I went there too.
Did you really?
I did for a couple of years.
All I ever got to do was visit my brothers there one time to see where I was supposed to go next year. And my parents decided near the end of that school year that they were not going to re-enroll my brothers in school because they felt like they were being exposed to too many worldly influences. So they decided to homeschool us. But this was in the very, very early 70s, about 71 or 72, somewhere in there, and homeschooling was not legal in the state of Alabama. So the city ended up, we were reported to the city, and the city ended up giving my parents an ultimatum. They either enroll us in either Annanite or one of the public schools, or we'd be taken away. And my father said, I have a different option, exit stage left. So he bundled us up, whisked us off to Arkansas, and then we began a kind of nomadic life. We ended up living in a bus that had been converted into a mobile home. And we lived in Tennessee, and then we moved to a state park and lived in a state park for a year. And finally, we bought 50 acres out in Tennessee, the central southern part of Tennessee. And it was among a range of hills. It was difficult to get to, several dirt roads removed from the nearest paved road, no electricity, running water, we were pretty much isolated up there. And by this time we were also wearing bonnets. That started when I was about 8 years old. We began wearing bonnets, my mother and I. So we're in bonnets and long dresses, living out in the middle of nowhere. And our modern convenience was a car. And so we did have that, and we had a chainsaw for cutting trees, so we didn't use the handsaw, had the chainsaw there.
Now, let me just ask you something. Did you have any other friends around? Was it just the family in isolation, or did you associate with other like-minded families?
It's a cross between the two. It depended on the time of the year and what was happening. So in the spring and summer, sometimes people of like mind would come and either stay with us or stay with the Moreland family, which lived a mile up the road. So it was just he and his wife, but sometimes people would come and stay on his property in little campers and wherever they could live, or sometime in his home with him. And we also brought people to stay with us from time to time. They'd stay anywhere from days to weeks, and a few stayed for a few months. There was one family, Sister Martha, as I called her, and she ended up in the later half of the time I was living on the hill. She ended up pulling up a mobile home, and she was up there on a piece of property at some distance. So she had 2 younger children. So my closest companions were about 4 and 5 years younger than me. And that was a period of probably the last 2 years that we lived on the hill.
Can you remember what you were thinking during that time? It seems like the adjustment must have been it was such a rigid way to live. Do you remember how you were thinking then? Was it just something that you were hating, or were you just thinking it was normal?
I knew it wasn't normal for other people's lives, but it was normal for mine. Remember, I never started school, so I never really did. I was right at that age where the social life was about to happen, and then it didn't happen. So it was normal for me, pretty much. I knew that other people didn't live the way we did, but the way they lived seemed strange to me and foreign. So I couldn't relate to it.
Right.
I could only relate to our lives.
What was going on with your parents that they went from a moderate way of living to extreme?
Well, first, they weren't trying to be extreme. What they were trying to do is what a lot of Christian and Adventist parents often try to do, which is to live out everything that they believe is right. But they had probably been reading more than the average parent about all the reforms, and they got focused on the reforms. One thing I've learned in life is that what you focus on and emphasize is always more important than what you say is more important. So
unpack that a little bit.
Okay, so they did believe in salvation by faith in Jesus Christ and all, righteousness by faith. They believed in all of these things, but the focus became about what we knew and what we did. And that's not unlike a lot of people, Their focus is on what they know and what they do, and they tend to focus on the details. So the number of inches from the floor, the width of your bonnet brim. We kept new moons and feast days, and that became an issue because, do you observe the new moons according to when the moon is completely black and can't be seen like one segment of the Jews believe, or do you observe the new moon day according to when there's this little fingernail of a sliver like another segment? And see, what would happen is if you believe this, the black moon, and I believe in the little sliver fingernail of the moon, then I can't worship with you, you can't worship with me. So there's very few people anyway that held our beliefs, and then so often it was like, get off my property and don't come back, you're teaching error. So I know I'm kind of going off from your question, but this is what when you begin to focus on details, there's no limit to how small those details become because they all seem to be important.
Yes, what an interesting point. As you're talking, I'm feeling like this was such bondage. We're to be free in Christ, and this is nothing personal. I mean,
sure,
I'm sure you know what I'm saying.
Yes.
This is not anything against your family or you
or
your journey. But I'm just saying that the bondage involved here has got to be so off-putting. You are such as I interact with you, and as we interacted prior to this program, I mean, you're warm and you're friendly and and you seem free, and I praise God for that. I want to find out how that happened. But prior to whatever happened to turn this situation around, you were in such bondage.
I really was. You know, Jesus says, these things you ought not have done. And he's talking about the Pharisees paying tithe on mint and anise and cumin, okay? He says, these things you ought to have done, but not let the other undone. It's good that you want to get all the details right, but you can't focus on all the details and the big things at the same time. You literally have to focus on what is most important first. And the little details can fall into place more naturally. And yes, you are right. I feel so amazingly free. It's a place in my life that I've wanted to be for a long time, and I'm here, and I've been here for a while, and it's a freedom that comes in Jesus and understanding too. There's a picture of me. At some point, you'll probably show it. I'm dressed in a bonnet and you can't see much of the dress, but I'm holding a Bible in my hand and I'm looking so pious. And even though by that time in my life I had a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, my mindset was so filled with rules and laws and obligations that I didn't know how to be free. I didn't know how to be spontaneous. You know, righteousness was not about love, which is what it is about.
Right.
Instead, it was about being right in every exact way. And that's why we had to live in seclusion in our own little outpost, as it were. That's what we used to refer to it,
yeah,
outpost on the hill. We had to live like that because there was no way we could have maintained that life in mainstream society. We had to separate. And yet Jesus says that you are the light of the world. You are the salt of the earth. I want you to be in the world.
Yes.
I just don't want you to be of it.
Right.
And I have to say, I'm all up in this world. I'm just not of it, you know, because the world is not fueled by love, and God has put love into my life. And you're supposed to be asking my story, and I'm preaching you a sermon.
No,
I just
no,
have to
preach.
say,
We love
I have been set free.
And
it's an amazing
we feel
thing.
that. You know, we can see that. I can see it in your countenance. You
Yes.
are free, and you're free
Yes.
because of the love of Jesus. It's not propelled by law.
No.
It's propelled by love.
Yes.
And relationship, and that's what you're
Relationship.
showing. So let's go a little bit more into your journey so we can
Sure.
find out how you did the turnaround. Okay, so you're 5 years old, you're off to this outpost, you live there for how many years?
So by the time we actually got out to the hill in Tennessee, I was 9 by that time. So just a few years of living in a bus and all that, and then out on the hill. And I was there until I was 16, heading toward 17.
So you're a teenager now, living like that. Where was your head about the Lord? Were you resenting all of this, all of these rules and restrictions?
No, the funny thing about children, and I've seen other children raised in extremes like this, they kind of take the day-to-day. Some of the harder things are like hunger, when you're always hungry. I wasn't always hungry. My mother did her best to feed us. Both our parents did their best to feed us. But there were times when the food ran scarce and they'd tell us, you know what, time to exercise your survival skills. Go out and find your food today. So there were those times, but for the most part, they did try to feed us, but we only ate 2 meals a day, another reform. See, I don't think we had it in balance, because I'm not sure Ellen White meant that young, growing children should eat 2 meals a day, right? So going to bed hungry was a routine thing. I didn't even think of it as being hungry, because you just drink cold water and go to bed. It's not something you can do anything about. I really have a hard time answering questions about how did I feel. Because I think one of the things that I learned early was probably not to feel so much. Because it's just the way it was, and you don't necessarily question it. Now, I had the younger of my 2 older brothers, he did start questioning. And so he had his eyes wide open long before he left. But I was more of a gullible one. Just, this is the way it's supposed to be, and I'm ingesting it. But yet the Lord was showing me things after I gave my heart to him at 14. He began to show me things that just didn't add up to his character.
Now, let's go back now,
Yes.
unpack this a little bit.
Yes.
What happened that you decided to give your heart to the Lord at 14?
I had felt a drawing since I was little toward the Lord. I even felt like he chose my name. My name, Rachel Elizabeth. Rachel means ewe lamb, and Elizabeth means consecrated one. So I thought of myself as a lamb consecrated to God. And I felt like he had chosen my name. I had always felt like I was special to him in some way. But at 14, what happened is there had been some people, had a number of families, probably about 5 families total. When I say families, I mean that loosely, because some were like one person living in one unit, and then maybe a single mother and a couple children, and then another family here or there. So there was a total of about 5 families that were staying on the hill in various mobile homes and makeshift living facilities between our home and Brother Moreland's home, which was a mile up the road. And so for me, it was an extremely social atmosphere. I actually had people to be around, you know, from time to time. And so I was enjoying that. And then they all moved, because as the fall turned toward winter, nobody wanted to be up there in that environment because it's very harsh.
No heat, no electricity.
Right, exactly. Just wood heat. They didn't want it, so they all moved. And so I felt only Brother Marlon, even his wife went to stay somewhere else during the winter. So it was just him living up the road by himself, and then my family. And I felt so utterly alone after that little tease of socialization. And that's when I began to realize I can't control anything in my life. I don't have the ability to make people be around me. I can't break out of this environment that I'm in. I don't have control of anything. I need to give my life over to one who does have the control. And so I surrendered my life to God. Kind of strange way of coming there, but feeling utter despair sent me to the Lord.
Amen. And you know, God knew what you needed.
Yes.
And always does know what we need.
Yes.
And so you were in utter despair, and it seems as though he just revealed himself to you even more.
Yeah, I think that, you know, I mentioned that I learned not to feel, but at that time I could not keep the sense of isolation and loneliness and aloneness. It was so profound. I was just completely in despair. And that's why I had to turn to the one who would never leave me.
And that's so beautiful. And so how did that play out? After you did that, where did you go from there?
I began to pray after I accepted the Lord. I began to read the Bible, the Spirit of Prophecy in different ways to really understand for myself, is what I was learning about God really what God was? Because some things just didn't seem right. And the more I read and the more I prayed, the more I read, the more I began to pray and ask the Lord to let me leave that environment, because I realized that even if I was not on the right path, I wasn't free to change. There was no option to change. And most of all, I wanted education. I wanted to go to school so badly. And I was tired of just being alone, learning alone, and I couldn't learn. So I began to pray, and the answer to the prayer came in the form of my father leaving. He just left. He took my older brother. They went to build houses in Texas, and it was supposed to be something they would be gone for a few months and come back with some funds, because we were very low on funds. But on the way, getting ready to leave, he told me he wasn't going to come back. And I was shocked, and I could tell my mother didn't know. She was standing by the car getting ready to say goodbye, and her first warning of it was when she went to give him a goodbye kiss, he turned his head away. And then he ended up saying some words to her that I hadn't heard before, and, you know, he was like, he was leaving. And he had already told me he was not coming back, and that turned out to be the case. He didn't even stay in Texas for more than a month. He ended up going back up north to his hometown and began trying to create a life for himself. And the only thing I could think of is that everything about the lifestyle he set up for us was all focused on Jesus coming by the end of that decade, which was the 1970s. And now we were into 1980 and 81 and heading into 82, and Jesus still hadn't come. So, you know, so he left. My mother and the younger of my 2 older brothers and I went through a horrible winter. I write about how my heel froze, and it was incredibly cold. We didn't even know if we'd survive that particular winter, but we made it. And I'm still not answering your question. I'm so sorry.
No, you're doing great. You're doing great. No, I'm just thinking, here's it's kind of blowing my mind, because you have a situation where the whole point is to live according to what God would have you,
yes,
the way he would have you live,
yes,
down to every jot and tittle,
yes,
of reform.
Yes.
But when it came to staying with your family, you just, it's over, it's done, and you got to make it the best way you can. How devastating must that have been to your mom, to you?
Yeah.
How devastating.
Well, it really was, because I had nothing in my mind that could understand what was happening, because everything had been, you have to understand, my environment was so saturated with religion and God and religion, everything, that the concept of my parents breaking up was not there. I mean, the family that prays together stays together, and we prayed together 3 times a day, 1 hour each. I mean, we had 1 hour worships 3 times a day. Okay, we prayed together. We had training, everything Bible. The whole idea of just this happening wouldn't have occurred to me, but it happened.
Right.
And so then in the end, my younger brother went to join my older brother because he was extremely restless and he wanted to leave. He wanted to get out. So he ended up joining my older brother, and then it was just my mom and I. There was no way we could make it on our own. You know, the manual labor involved in daily life. We're talking about washing clothes, even washing dishes. You've got to haul the water to wash dishes. You know, I often use the illustration of making getting a glass of milk. If you want a glass of milk, you reach in your fridge, pour it, and drink it. We had to take the soybeans, soak them, grind them up, rinse them out in a cheesecloth into water, boil it on the stove. But boiling it on the stove means you have to have cut your wood and gathered kindling and gone through a whole process just to be able to lay a fire. And then you're going to burn a fire year-round to boil your milk, because, or whatever you're fixing. Every day of the year we had to create a fire, except on the Sabbath, because we didn't cook on the Sabbath. But other than that, it could be 90 degrees. It could be 100 degrees. You still have to use the stove to cook. So, you know, so there's all of that. And then when you finally get done making your glass of milk and it's boiled, because you can't drink raw soybeans, so you have to boil it, and you cool it, because there's no ice that you can add to it to cool it, so it has to naturally cool a few hours. And you finally drink your glass of milk. The rest of it, you can't just put in the fridge.
That's right.
So you either have to can it, which means more heat in the summer if it's during the summer, or you could put a little bit in a jar and store that in the stream overnight. And that was about it. Otherwise, you know, so think about that. That's just a glass of milk. Every process was so manual, we couldn't do it. So my mom ended up writing someone who had been corresponding with my father, and they had been trading magazines, and she had come to visit us once before, and she asked her, she was planning to come that summer, and my mom just took a chance and wrote her and said, would you send us 2 one-way tickets instead of coming on a round trip ticket, because we need to leave. We don't have anywhere to go. So she did, and I was determined. I just knew one thing: I wasn't coming back without going to school. That was the thing. I knew that God had given me a way to go to school. Mm-hmm. And I ended up going to Fountain View. It was Farms back then, and now it's Fountain View Academy. I feel like I'm a racing train running away with your interview. I'm sorry.
No. Believe me, if I have a question, I will ask. I'm just loving where you're going with this, because you're really tracing your journey for us. Yeah. And so who knows better than you do. My question now, though, is, so you said something that I wasn't aware of, and that is your family was basically living like that in expectation of the return of Christ.
Yes.
And when it didn't happen, when your dad thought it would, he became disillusioned, I guess,
you know,
with everything.
I really want to comment on that. You're right in your observation. I really want to comment on that, because I think there are a lot of people. Have you noticed there's this fervor? You know, Jesus is coming again. Got to be ready. You know, let's get out there and share the truth and tell the world. More in the world is coming. It's coming. People will drop out of school. They'll make changes to, like, use all their retirement funds for a particular project. That kind of thing. And I am not condemning anybody's choice to do those things, but it's clearly based on the idea that Jesus is coming so soon that I don't need to do these things. I don't need to prepare to stay here.
I don't need to occupy till
I don't need to occupy. And then often if you try to say something to people like that, they will say to you, you know, you're just not serious about Jesus coming. But what I notice, even though Jesus says to watch the signs, he never said to live by them day by day. He said to watch them, observe them, okay? But he also, if you look at the focus of the Bible, it's on the certainty of Christ coming and the unexpectedness of his return, not on the nearness. not on the nearest.
Which is not to say that it's not near.
No.
It is to say that the emphasis has to be in the right place.
And the reason why I'm bringing this out is if you're living on expectancy of Jesus coming within a short time based on your understanding of short and long, it can create an urgency in your life which cannot sustain itself. There is an urgency that God can place in your life that runs from day to day. So I'm aware every moment that I'm ministering, whether I'm talking to one individual or whether I'm talking to thousands, I'm aware every moment that God is trying to save somebody. God is trying to use somebody. I'm also aware of the fact that I, while preaching to others, could become a castaway. And there's an urgency about what I do every day, but it's not related to whether Jesus is going to come in 2016 or whether he's going to come in, you name it. It's related to the fact that every moment is a moment that's been given us, and tomorrow is not mine. So I can only do what he's asked me to do right now. You see? And I guess I want to say to people who are running on the second return fervor, sometimes it's not sustainable. And if it is sustainable for you, great, but it's not sustainable for everybody around you. And it wasn't for my father, because everything was based on the fact that the world was not going to continue. And then the world kept going. Obviously, it's still going.
Right.
You know?
And even though, we feel closer to his return, we are closer than we've ever been.
We're always closer. Yeah.
But you still, it does need to be sustainable, and your focus has to be on that relationship and sharing Jesus with others. That's really the bottom line.
Every moment that God gives you is a moment that you won't have again.
That's right.
Whether he comes tomorrow or whether he comes 1,000 years from now, the moment you have right now is all you actually have. Yesterday's gone, tomorrow may never be. The urgency is always to live fully in the moment.
That's right.
Right now.
Live in the moment.
Yeah.
That's absolutely true. Tell us in 30 seconds what you're doing now. I can't believe our time is up.
Oh,
this is so good. You've just given me such great information.
I lost all perspective of time, so. But it's amazing. This young lady this child who was kept away from media and the world and kept at home, now I am the chair of a department in which I feel called to this place and at this time to help with young people being able to reshape media so that it can appeal to other young people. I find that our young people are not watching our Adventist programming, and I'd like to see that change. And that's a mission that's on my heart.
Well, we need to talk, because this is a network here, Dare to Dream, and we are looking to make a difference with young and old. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for
having me.
having
What a blessing to have you. Make sure to pick up a copy of her book, Born Yesterday. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. Join us next time, because you know what? It just wouldn't be the same without you.